Bruce Wayne with one of my new amazing stories. So the last time I was telling you about the summer that we had before attending Brighton High School. So once that was over, I had a pretty good group of guys to enter high school. And high school started off sort of somewhat uneventful. Turns out that the seniors didn't really mess with you that much. I don't remember an interaction with a senior in my earlier years in high school. They kept to themselves and they pretty much didn't want to have anything to do with freshmen. But on the other hand, I remember, that breakdancing thing that I was doing. Breakdancing was becoming very, very popular at that time. It was huge, just breakdancing and graffiti. And we heard about the New York Breakers, and Beat Street became this big movie at the height of breakdancing. And there were breakdance battles. It's interesting because I was hearing some of the other guys, one of the guys from Public Enemy talking about all these stupid kids dancing instead of dealing with social issues. But I felt that from my experience, I did not, like I said, the American culture and some of the struggles that were going on, I was very insulated from it. And the engagement that I had being in Boston was more along the culture at that time was basically, school, trying to fit in school, trying to make friends, trying to compete in breakdancing. But even before then, I think I got the competitive bug when I did my first pool competition. Remember, I told you that I won that competition in pool, and so this was it for this says here, the under 16 West End House Boys Club. So this was the I ended up beating everybody in that particular, let me see if it might say it here. It says Checkers champion, 16 and under. So it doesn't say where, but it was for a particular region. And the second one that I won for the same thing, I practiced a lot. This one was for pool, and this one was for checkers. And so same thing happened. I practiced checkers for 5 hours a day until I got so good at it that I ended up, competing in the region there, and I also won that as well. So at that point, I had the competitive bug within me and winning, and I realized that if you focus really hard and you train really hard, you could win stuff. And then when you win stuff, and also when you got good at it, you took on leadership roles. So around my friends, I was not just the follower; they were following me. I was one of the leaders in the crowd, and so the kid who started off with the weird fashion and the really messed up haircut turned out to be the kid that a lot of my other friends followed. And so at some point, I remember, there was a whole bunch of us at that point, tons, probably about 15, 20 friends at that point that we were hanging out together. So our group got bigger and bigger. And because the boys club would attract so many different people. And I think other people would hear about something going on at the boys club and they'd visit the boys club. And so I remember when Tripp, that African-American guy, the one that I said was, he was in the National Guards at the time. Yeah, I remember when Tripp showed up, he brought something new to us, which is, let's compete. Let's formalize this. You guys are pretty good at what you do. Let's take the stuff on the road. And so he's the first one who said, we need a name of our group. And it was him, another friend of mine, Tito, and I. We were sort of the three oldest, and we would sit there and try to argue and figure out what to name the group. And in the end, our first name was the Battle Zone Breakers, and I think Tripp is the one who came up with that name. And it was looking back, that was a really damn cool name, the Battle Zone Breakers. And so we actually, with the Battle Zone Breakers, I remember us, we entered a few competitions, but the one that I remember the most was, by the way, backing up a little bit, Tripp had this, so we practiced our moves the entire summer long, and, Tripp was practicing doing the windmill, and I was trying to practice to get it. I could do the windmill, but I was not as good at it as others were, but I got pretty good at breakdancing. But the thing about breakdancing is that each person sort of had a specialty. that one person could pop real well. And by then we sort of faded away from Agato and Keith and because they were not competing in breakdancing, and I started hanging out with these other, some of my other friends who were actually into breakdancing. I'd still see Agato and some of my other friends, at different points. But as far as breakdancing were concerned, that's what, it was, Trip and Tito and some of the other guys. And I remember this one little kid, and he was 9 years old. His name was Eloy. And Eloy was this cute little kid, and Trip saw one of these guys. I guess he must have saw this move somewhere where you put one guy on the neck and the other one on the front, and basically he's spinning them in circle, and it is like one guy is hanging out in the front, his legs are all the way out, and Eloy's in the back, and he put Eloy on his head, and he's spinning Eloy on his head while I think it was crazy. It was just because Trip was in very good shape, and so he had like 2 people or 3 people. One guy I think is hooked around his waist, and he's spinning Eloy on his head, and and it was just the coolest move. And then he had this other move that he called the frog. And Trip would just stay there and just go on the stage. And it was this cool move. And so, I was good at the crab, on your hand, anything hand related, hand spins, crabs, not that kind of crabs. Not good at that crabs. Okay, I'm talking about the dance move crab. Okay, and so I was really good at that. And several other things. And I was good at planning and organizing and strategizing and stuff like that. And so I remember our first competition where we went down to Lowell, Massachusetts to compete at the stadium. And when we got there, the stadium, it wasn't the capacity, but it was probably about maybe a third capacity. So I'd say there's, maybe 1,000 people, or maybe it might have been a couple thousand people there. But that's the biggest crowd that I've ever seen that came out, because it was everyone from that community. So I think it was possibly half packed, that stadium at the time. And I remember all these groups from all over the place showed up to compete, and they were on stage and before the competition started, and they were showing off all their moves. And we're telling each other, we're like, don't do anything, don't show anything, don't let them see what you can do. Let's just hang back. And all of them are on there, and they're showing off before the competition, showing all their moves. And we just sat there, didn't say anything. We're just quiet, we're polite. And then the competition started. And everybody was, each group went up, they were doing their thing, but it was more of the same because they had pretty much showed most of their moves, and the crowd had gotten there early. So by the time, my group, the Battle Zone Breakers, went on stage, and we started to dance. These kids had never seen the moves that we were doing before, and not with the level of proficiency. This one guy, Amir, was doing a windmill, and he was just the crown of his head was the only thing touching the floor, and he was just whipping it so fast. And the thing that you need to understand about breakdancing, it's one of the only kind of activity that I remember that you can give it. When you're doing a windmill and you're going so fast that it's like you can feel the amount of energy as you're just go. Or you're doing a crab and you're just spinning. It's a blur down there, and you're just going. I mean, there's something just very powerful about it, and that's one of the reasons I always thought, why isn't this in the Olympics? Because I would look at gymnasts and I'd go, we do flips. Some of the guys are doing flares. Some of the guys are doing flips. I'm like, some of the moves that these guys are doing, I've seen lots of kids doing that. So later, 20-something years later, now breakdancing is actually in the Olympics. Not as part of it, but the actual breakdance portion of it. And I can see why, because it was very physical, very technical moves that were being done. And so we started to breakdance, and those kids, the people in the crowd, had never seen anything quite like that. Trip was on there, and he was doing the frog all over the place, and I was doing the crab, and Amir was doing the windmill, and Trip got Eloy, and he spinned him on his head, and it was all of us are out there. We're all doing something different, so we made sure that we're less orchestrated, like we're doing more synchronized, and less synchronized, but more just different, just a smorgasbord of different kind of moves going at the same time that people couldn't figure out who to put their eyes on. And after a while, I looked out for a second because I was just in a zone, and our competition was cheering for us. All the kids that were competing against us started cheering for us because they were so impressed by it. It was one of the coolest moments. I mean, when have you ever been to a competition that your competitors are cheering for you because you're so damn good at what you did? And we won, obviously, and they were happy for us and they were impressed. And we got this cassette radio, and it was, at the time, boom boxes were in. And there were these normal boom boxes that would have one cassette tape in there. For you young people, a cassette tape is where the music is on there. It's on this little reel, and you put it in this thing, and it spins on this thing. You got to go to the museum and check it out. It makes noise. It's not like a CD or a DVD or even vinyl. But talk to your parents. So but this particular one, it didn't have one or two cassette players. It had 3 cassette players, and we had never seen anything like that before. We heard about it, but it was the first time that we all, and there was just one cassette boom box that we had, and Larry was there too. Larry was there, and Larry was from New York, and he could pop really good, and Larry was just a very cool guy. And so we had it was just so many good things going on there at that time. And so we won the boom box, and then what we did is we would share it among each of the people of our team members. So you'd have it for a couple of weeks, you'd have it for a couple of weeks, you'd have it for a couple of weeks, and that's kind of how we did it. And I remember that every year, it's like, I think it's in the summertime. Yes, in the summertime, what would happen is that the West End House Boys Club, because that's where we practice. We practice at the West End House Boys Club because there was a room there that we could all practice in. They had all these mats, like gymnastics mat, which you would need to practice because when you're doing a flip, if you did it wrong and you land on the floor, it would really bloody hurt. So I did a lot of my practice in 5 hours a day in there on these mats, learning the different moves and in order to get good at it. And then I remember in the summertime, the West End House Boys Club would close. It closed for the summertime for I think for half the summer or most of the summer. I think it was like half the summer for several weeks and maybe about 6 weeks. And so during that time, we all still needed to practice, but we didn't have any place to practice. And so we decided Boston University had this football field out there for the semi-pros or whatever it is. It's a college football. They had lots of football fields, but this particular one was close to our house. And so we all went down there, and at the time, you'd bring a piece of linoleum with you. Linoleum is like the floor and cover that you'd put on your floor back in the day. You just roll it out on your floor. It was cheap, but it was slippery. And what was good about it is that, if you had on a breakdancing kind of jacket that was kind of out of a certain fabric, sort of like a nylonish fabric, when you would do like backspins on it, the smooth surface from the linoleum would make you spin really fast. If you're doing a windmill, it'd make you spin a lot faster. So because of that, you would see a lot of these kids who are competing in breakdancing, they'd come with their linoleum and their boom box and they'd just throw it down on the floor. And all of a sudden there's a competition anywhere, on any street. As long as you roll out the linoleum, there is a battle on and people are ready to compete with each other. They have the radio, you got your linoleum, boom, competition is on to see who's better at a certain move. And I guess at the time, breakdancing for more of the adults' point of view was better for the kids because at least the kids weren't getting into gangs, they weren't getting into drugs. Look, if all we were doing were harmless, we're dancing, we're competing, we're dancing. Breakdancing is actually, honestly, very physical. So technically, your kids are being physically fit. They're exercising. They're traveling all over the place and competing with other people to say, hey, I'm better at my physical activity than you are. So in that sense, you're keeping out of trouble for the most part. And at the time, graffiti was a thing too, and some people were spraying graffiti. But my group was not really into the graffiti that much. There was a kid by the name of Will that came from New York that started doing some graffiti stuff. But we were more into the breakdance stuff. And so we were at the Boston University Park, all of us there practicing week after week, day after day. And then there was a dance studio that was that the Boston University football field was sort of adjacent to. And so apparently this guy was looking out the window from the dance studio, and he was looking at these kids out there breakdancing out there, and he was so impressed by us. His name was Murph. And Murph came out and introduced himself to us, and he's like, "You guys are pretty good." And so he actually he invited us into the dance studio to just show us around. And of course, you know, it was weird to us, like, what's with this older white guy, you know, inviting us into this strange place. I'm like, what is he going to do to us? But there was a whole bunch of us, so we weren't really threatened by it. So we got in there, and there's this cool dance studio with lots of mirrors around, and your typical 1980s dance studio with the bar, or circling around, and the mirrors there, and the nice mat and everything. And people spend tons of money to come to this wonderful dance studio. And Murph's, he was like, "Hey, you guys can actually practice here." And we're like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, you don't have to practice in the park anymore." So all of a sudden, we were practicing in the studio for free. In this very expensive, posh studio. All of us were going in there. We were practicing, for our competition. And Murph said to us, he says, you guys, there's this nightclub. I'd like for you guys to consider putting together an act, some sort of performance, and then you can bring it to the nightclub, and you guys can perform at the nightclub. And so we're like, cool. And at the time, Michael Jackson was huge. People don't understand now. I know a lot of generation now, Michael Jackson is not cool because you only see him as a pedophile, whatever. But let me tell you, Michael Jackson back in the day was huge. Everybody wanted to be Michael Jackson. The day Michael Jackson did the moonwalk, it's like the country stopped. I remember where I was when Michael Jackson did the moonwalk. Okay, it's like one of those things. Because there weren't a lot of different TV stations. The internet wasn't around then. So one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that back then, there's only a few TV stations, like 2 or 3 of them. And so when you go to school and you say, "Did you see that last night?" Everybody knew what you were talking about. And so at that time, Michael Jackson basically stopped the world when he did the moonwalk. And when he did Thriller, oh my God, it was just and so our group, Trip, decided that he's like, we should do Thriller. And so at the time, the haircut, the Michael Jackson haircut with a Jerry curl was in, and my brother Michael actually decided to get Jerry curls. And so he was, and the girls thought he looked like Michael Jackson, and because he was kind of skinny as well too, and he was a good looking kid. And so Michael Jackson was the Michael Jackson of our group, and then we all did Thriller. And so Trip got the making of Thriller, the tape, the cassette tape. And again, a cassette tape is where the video is. You put it in what's called a VCR for the young people, and it plays, and you see movies. Look it up in the museum or Google it. So anyway, we watched the making of Thriller, and the guy, the choreographer is counting through 1, 2, 3, get you girl, and he's going through all these different moves, and you're down and you're up and you're, and ta-ta. When Michael Jackson's doing that, and we were doing all of that stuff from Thriller. You need to check out Thriller. You'll see the moves. So we learned all the moves from Thriller, and we went to and so that, we went to the nightclub, and we performed Thriller that night at the nightclub. And this is late at night at the club. We were underage. I was 16, maybe 17. All of us were pretty young. We were not, this is a 21 and over nightclub, and all these damn young kids are in there performing Thriller. I don't even know how our parents even let us do it, but for whatever reason, we were at the nightclub, we performed Thriller, and that was, again, another moment. And so I think we did a couple of nightclubs, and then this was towards the end of breakdance, and at that point, breakdance was kind of winding down. But one of the things is that Murph would film every single or most of the performances that we have, from Thriller at the nightclub to us, practicing breakdancing at different places, and so we had all of those on these tapes, these cassette tapes, and it was really cool to have it because we were getting older and breakdancing was kind of fading out, and so I thought, well, at least we'll have these tapes to look back to, and I remember asking my friend Tito, I said, where are those tapes? And he goes, oh, my mom filmed soap operas over the tapes. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm like, he's like, yeah, she didn't think we needed those, so she just filmed, she just used the cassette, the videotape and taped over it and taped her soap opera. And I was just so sad about that because I thought, that was our childhood. We will never do this again. We'll never have this memory again. I don't think she realized that at the time. And of course, she's a really awesome woman, so I'm not dissing her. No diss here, Tito. I was just sad about that your mom did that. So that was it. Breakdancing was winding down, and that our memories were gone of that. So that's what I have about the years of breakdancing and how good we were at the time and the highlights of that. I also remember the ew factor. Like much earlier when I just got to the U.S. and I was telling these kids that I ate curry goat, and they're like, goat? You ate a goat? Oh my God! Ew! Ew! Gross! You eat goat! Now I see a lot of people, eating curry goat and eating oxtail and eating a lot of different Jamaican foods. I'm like, oh, so now it's cool? And, oh, I love the Jamaican accent. Some people would say, and I'm thinking, oh, now it's cool. Because I remember back then I was just a coconut. That little coconut from Jamaica, man. Okay, and picking on my accent. And it's so funny how life comes full circle. Because I remember that, people would pick on my accent and, I'm not talking, Keith was a nice guy, but, some people would pick on your accent and kind of make fun of you. But what would happen as time went by, I noticed something. Park the car in the yard. I realized in Boston, they got this really weird way of talking too. Park the car in Harvard Yard. Okay, and I'm like, wait a minute. So you guys are picking on me about how I talk? If you listen to how you talk, park the car? I remember when I was working in the hospital and one of the nurses, and they said, well, where's the patient? And the nurse says, he's in his rum. And I go, what? He's in his what? She says, oh, he's in his rum. And I go, rum? You mean room, right? She goes, oh, yeah, same thing. So I started laughing. I realized that in each culture, languages are kind of different. You hear, things sound different. So those were my breakdancing years. And then at some point towards the end, kind of sort of towards the end of breakdancing, we started to go to nightclubs. And I told you earlier that we were going to some clubs. Well, we kept, every time we'd go out a little bit further out, we'd drive out further. And at this point, people were getting their own cars. And I didn't have a car, but I'd hop a ride with one of my friends and we would go to the different nightclubs. And so I was still kind of breakdancing, but I would always hear about these guys going to the club and, they went out further, because I'd just take the train down, about 20 minutes down to close to where Fenway Park is in Boston on what's called Lansdowne Street. And I'd go club there and go to the different clubs that were there. But these guys were like, those clubs are not cool anymore. We're going out further to these other clubs. And, there are all these girls out there. And I'm like, oh, girls, okay. So after a while, I'm like, let me go see what these guys are doing, because they're claiming that the action is better over there. So when I got there, what I realized is these guys, they'd get all dressed up, they'd drive like crazy to get there, and then they would get to the club, and then I watched them, they're just standing against the wall, watching everyone else dance. And I was like, what? I'm like, you guys came all the way down here so you can just sit there and watch people dance? Because what I realized is that they're very shy. And, I know we live in an era now where I think some of the things I think women don't understand is how difficult it is for men and for boys to try to ask a girl for a dance, or try to pick up a girl, or try to get a girlfriend, or to meet a girl, etc. And you go over to a girl, and if she's with her friends, and you say, "Can you have a dance?" She's like, "No," and you feel rejected and feel like a fool. It's those things, and so these guys, I guess they got there, but then probably got rejected one too many times and just kind of hugged the wall and just sat there and lived vicariously through all the other guys who were dancing. So when I got there, I said to them, "What are you guys doing?" I'm like, "Let's go dance." They're like, "Huh?" I'm like, "Let's start asking the girls to dance." I mean, the only thing they can say is no. So, I'd go out there and I'd get rejected a few times, but eventually somebody would dance with you. And because I'd learned that from going to the local clubs that, look, maybe you don't go home, you don't pick up the girl. And in fact, full disclosure, I have never met a girl at a nightclub that had ever worked out, that anything serious ever happened, that not even sex, nothing from a nightclub. The thing about nightclubs I remember is that when the girls were in the nightclub, it's like if there were 2, they would think there were 10. Their expectation was so high that very few guys could really meet that expectation of who they are and of what they were looking for. And so I didn't even bother trying there because, you can dance with a girl, but you're probably not going to get too much further. I got numbers all the time, but none of them ever really worked out into anything very serious. And so I realized that my skill sets was not to go to a club to pick up a girl to date. My skill set is, if I can get that girl outside the club, either after the, just in the regular world, not on the club night, but if I met someone outside in the real world where they're being realistic and I could talk to them, now we're on an equal playing field, and then I'd stand a good chance of being able to meet a girl or find a girlfriend, etc. And so I found that was better, where it was not, didn't have all these distractions, and then, level playing field, I felt like I had a good chance. But my interest of going to the club was just to have a good time. And so, every week we would go further out and further and further out. I think by the time high school, by the time we stopped clubbing, we were driving 6 hours, 5.5 to 6 hours from Boston to New York, party all night when we got to New York until about 5 o'clock in the morning. When you got outside, it was bright outside, and then drove back home. So, we were clubbing pretty hard at that point, and that was like at the peak of our clubbing days. I remember coming back to Boston, and at that point I'm getting older, and I want to tell you about something that happened. I got a scholarship to a couple of different scholarships, so I'm going to tell you about this on my next podcast. Anyway, as usual, check out one of my workout videos. And this one was filmed in the African Congo. It's in the slums of the African Congo. It's a dance type of video. And also download our app and check out some of our workout and our nutrition stuff that we have. And of course, please like my channel. It really helps me. And see you on the next episode. My name is Bruce Wayne, and thank you for watching.